On a cold, clear evening, the day after Grekov's dismissal of Shaposhnikov and Vengrova, Krimov, accompanied by a soldier with a Tommy gun, left Regimental HQ on his way to the notorious encircled house. As soon as he set foot in the asphalt yard of the tractor factory, Krimov felt an extraordinarily acute sense of danger. At the same time, he was conscious of an unaccustomed excitement and joy. The sudden message from front headquarters had confirmed his feeling that in Stalingrad everything was different, that the values and demands placed on people had changed. Krimov was no longer a cripple in a battalion of invalids. He was, once again, a Bolshevik, a fighting commissar. He wasn't in the least frightened by his difficult and dangerous task. It had been sweet indeed to read in the eyes of Pivovarov and the divisional commissar the same trust in his abilities that had once been displayed by all his comrades in the party. A dead soldier was lying on the ground between the remains of a mortar and some slabs of asphalt thrown up by a shell burst. Now that Krimov was so full of hope and exultation, he found this sight strangely upsetting. He had seen plenty of corpses in his time, and had usually felt quite indifferent. This soldier, so full of his death, was lying there like a bird, quite defenceless, his legs tucked under him, as though he were cold. A political instructor in a grey mackintosh ran past, holding up a well-filled knapsack. Then a group of soldiers came past, carrying some anti-tank shells on a tarpaulin, together with a few loaves of bread. The corpse no longer needed bread or weapons, nor was he hoping for a letter from his faithful wife. His death had not made him strong. He was the weakest in the world, a dead sparrow that not even the moths and midges were afraid of. Some soldiers were mounting their gun in a breach in the wall, arguing with the crew of a heavy machine gun and cursing. From their gestures, Krimov could more or less guess what they were saying. "Do you realise how long our machine gun stood here? We were hard at it when you lot were still hanging about on the left bank." "Well, you are a bunch of cheeky buggers." There was a loud whine and a shell burst in a corner of the workshop. Shrapnel rattled across the walls. Krimov's guide looked round to see if he was still there. He waited a moment and said, "Don't worry, Comrade Commissar, this isn't yet the front line. We're still way back in the rear." It wasn't long before Krimov realised the truth of this. The space by the wall was indeed relatively quiet. They had to run forward, drop flat on the ground, run forward and drop to the ground again. They twice jumped into trenches occupied by the infantry. They ran through burnt-out buildings, where instead of people there was only the whine of metal. The soldier said comfortingly, "At least there are no dive bombers," then added, "Right, Comrade Commissar, now we must make for that crater." Krimov slid down to the bottom of a bomb crater and looked up. The blue sky was still over his head, and his head was still on his shoulders. It was very strange. The only sign of other human beings was a singing and screaming death that came flying over his head from both sides. It was equally strange to feel so protected in this crater that had been dug out by the spade of death. Before Krimov had got his breath back, the soldier said, "Follow me," and crawled down a dark passage leading from the bottom of the crater. Krimov squeezed in after him. Soon the passage widened, the ceiling became higher, and they were in a tunnel. They could still hear the storm raging on the earth's surface. The ceiling shook, and there were repeated peals of thunder. In one place, full of lead piping and cables as thick as a man's arm, someone had written on the wall in red, "Markov's a donkey." The soldier turned on his torch for a moment and whispered, "Now the Germans are right above us." Soon they turned off into another narrow passage and began making their way towards a barely perceptible grey light. The light slowly grew brighter and clearer. At the same time, the roar of explosions and the chatter of machine guns became still more furious. For a moment Krimov thought he was about to mount the scaffold. And then they reached the surface, and the first thing he saw was human faces. They seemed divinely calm. Krimov felt a sense of joy and relief. Even the raging war now seemed no more than a brief storm passing over the head of a young traveller who was full of vitality. He felt certain that he had reached an important turning point, that his life would continue to change for the better. It was as though this still clear daylight were a sign of his own future. Once again he was to live fully, wholeheartedly, with all his will and intelligence, all his Bolshevik fervour. This new sense of youth and confidence mingled with his regret for Yevgenia. Now, though he no longer felt he had lost her forever, he would return to him. Just as his strength and his former life had returned to him, he was on her trail. A fire was burning in the middle of the floor. An old man, his cap pushed forward, was standing over it frying potato cakes on some tin plating. He turned them over with the point of a bayonet and stacked them in a tin hat when they were done. Spotting the soldier who had accompanied Krimov, he asked, "Is Seryotsa with you?" "There's an officer present," said the soldier sternly. "How old are you, Dad?" Krimov asked. 60, said the old man. "I was transferred from the workers' militia." He turned to the soldier again. "Is Seryotsa with you?" "No, he's not in our regiment. He must have ended up with our neighbours." "Oh, that's bad," said the old man. "God knows what will become of him there." Krimov greeted various people, looked round the different parts of the cellar with their half-dismantled wooden partitions. In one place there was a field gun pointing out through a loophole cut in the wall. "It's like a man of war," said Krimov. "Yeah, except there's not much water," said the gunner. Further on, in niches and gaps in the wall, were the mortars. Their long-tailed bombs lay on the floor beside them. There was also an accordion lying on a tarpaulin. "So, House 6-1 is still holding out," said Krimov, his voice ringing. "It hasn't yielded to the fascists. All over the world, millions of people are watching you and rejoicing." No one answered. Old Polyakov walked up to him and held out the tin hat full of potato cakes. "Has anyone written about Polyakov's potato cakes yet?" asked one soldier. "Very funny," said Polyakov. "But our Seryozsa's been thrown out." "Have they opened the second front yet?" asked another soldier. "Have you heard anything?" "No," said Krimov, "not yet." "Once heavy artillery on the left bank opened up on us," said a soldier with his jacket unbuttoned. "Kolomaitsev was knocked off his feet. When he got up, he said, 'Well, lads, there's the second front for you.'" "Oh, don't talk such rubbish," said a young man with dark hair. "We wouldn't be here at all if it wasn't for the artillery. The Germans would have eaten us up long ago." "Where's your commander?" asked Krimov. "There he is, over there, right in the front line." Grekov was lying on top of a huge heap of bricks, looking at something through a pair of binoculars. When Krimov called out his name, he turned his head very slowly, put his fingers to his lips, and returned to his binoculars. After a few moments, his shoulders started shaking. He was laughing. He crawled back down, smiled, and said, "It's worse than chess." Then he noticed the green bars and Commissar's star on Krimov's tunic. "Oh, welcome to our hut, Comrade Commissar. I'm Grekov, the house manager. Did you come by the passage we just dug?" Everything about him, the look in his eyes, his quick movements, his wide, flattened nostrils, was somehow insolent and provocative. "Never mind," thought Krimov. "I'll show you." He started to question him. Grekov answered slowly and absent-mindedly, yawning and looking around as though these questions were distracting him from something of genuine importance. "Would you like to be relieved?" asked Krimov. "Don't bother," said Grekov. "But we could do with some cigarettes. And, of course, we need mortar bombs, hand grenades, and, if you can spare it, some vodka and something to eat. You could drop it from a kukuruznik." As he spoke, Grekov counted the items off on his fingers. "So you're not intending to quit?" said Krimov. In spite of his mounting anger at Grekov's insolence, he couldn't help but admire the man's ugly face. For a brief moment both men were silent. Krimov managed with difficulty to overcome a sudden feeling that, morally, he was inferior to the men in the encircled building. "Are you logging your operations?" "I've got no paper," answered Grekov. "There's nothing to write on, no time, and there wouldn't be any point anyway." "At present, you're under the command of the CO of the 176th Infantry Regiment," said Krimov. "Correct, Comrade Battalion Commissar," replied Grekov mockingly. "But when the Germans cut off this entire sector, when I gathered men and weapons together in this building, when I repelled 30 enemy attacks and set 8 tanks on fire, then I wasn't under anyone's command." "Do you know the precise number of soldiers under your command as of this morning? Do you keep a check?" "A lot of use that would be. I don't write reports, and I don't receive rations from any quartermaster. We've been living on rotten potatoes and foul water." "Are there any women in the building?" "Tell me, Comrade Commissar, is this an interrogation?" "Have any men under your command been taken prisoner?" "No." "Well, where is that radio operator of yours?" Grekov bit his lip, and his eyebrows came together in a frown. "The girl turned out to be a German spy. She tried to recruit me. First I raped her, then I had her shot." He drew himself up to his full height and asked sarcastically, "Is that the kind of answer you want from me? It's beginning to seem as though I'll end up in a penal battalion. Is that right, sir?" Krimov looked at him for a moment in silence. "Grekov, you're going too far. You've lost all sense of proportion. I've been in command of a surrounded unit myself. I was interrogated afterwards too." After another pause, he said very deliberately, "My orders were that if necessary I should demote you and take command myself. Why force me along that path?" Grekov thought for a moment, cocked his head, and said, "It's gone quiet. The Germans are calming down." "Good," said Krimov. "There are still a few questions to be settled. We can talk in private." "Why?" asked Grekov. "My men and I fight together. We can settle whatever needs settling together." Although Grekov's audacity made Krimov furious, he had to admire it. He didn't want Grekov to think of him as just a bureaucrat. He wanted to tell him about his life before the war, about how his unit had been encircled in the Ukraine. But that would be an admission of weakness, and he was here to show his strength. He wasn't an official in the political section, but the commissar of a fighting unit. "And don't worry," he said to himself, "the commissar knows what he's doing." Now that things were quiet, the men were stretching out on the floor or sitting down on heaps of bricks. "Well, I don't think the Germans will cause any more trouble today," said Grekov. He turned to Krimov. "Why don't we have something to eat, Comrade Commissar?" Krimov sat down next to him. "As I look at you all," he said, "I keep thinking of the old saying, Russians always beat Prussians." "Precisely," agreed a quiet, lazy voice. This precisely, with its condescending irony towards such hackneyed formulae, caused a ripple of mirth. These men knew at least as much as Krimov about the strength of the Russians. They themselves were the expression of that strength, but they also knew that if the Prussians had now reached the Volga, it certainly wasn't because the Russians always beat them. Krimov was feeling confused. He felt uncomfortable when political instructors praised Russian generals of past centuries. The way these generals were constantly mentioned in articles in Red Star grated on his revolutionary spirit. He couldn't see the point of introducing the Suvorov Medal, the Kutuzov Medal, and the Bogdan Khmelnytsky Medal. The revolution was the revolution. The only banner its army needed was the red flag. So why had he himself given away to this kind of thinking, just when he was once again breathing the air of Lenin's revolution. That mocking "precisely" had been very wounding. Well, comrades, you don't need anyone to teach you about fighting. You can give lessons in that to anyone in the world. But why do you think our superior officers considered it necessary to send me to you? What have I come here for? Was it for a bowl of soup? Asked a voice, quietly and without malice. This timid suggestion was greeted by a peal of laughter. Krimov looked at Grekov, who was laughing as much as anyone. "Comrades," said Krimov, red with anger, "let's be serious for a moment. I've been sent to you, comrades, by the party." What was all this? Was it just a passing mood, a mutiny? Perhaps the reluctance of these men to listen to their commissar came from their sense of their own strength, of their own experience. Perhaps there was nothing subversive in all this merriment. Perhaps it sprang from the general sense of equality that was such a feature of Stalingrad. Previously, Krimov had been delighted by this sense of equality. Why did it now make him so angry? Why did he want to suppress it? If he had failed to make contact with these men, it was certainly not because they felt crushed, because they were in any way bewildered or frightened. These were men who knew their own strength. How was it that this very consciousness had weakened their bond with Krimov, giving rise only to mutual alienation and hostility? "There's one thing I've been wanting to ask someone from the party for ages," said the old man who had been frying the potato cakes. "I've heard people say that under communism, everyone will receive according to his needs. But won't everyone just end up getting drunk? Especially if they receive according to their needs from the moment they get up." Turning to the old man, Krimov saw a look of genuine concern on his face. Grekov, though, was laughing. His eyes were laughing. His flared nostrils were laughing. A sapper, a dirty blood-stained bandage round his head, asked, "And what about the kolkhozes, Comrade Commissar? Couldn't we have them liquidated after the war?" "Yes," said Grekov. "How about a lecture on that?" "I'm not here to give lectures," said Krimov. "I'm a fighting commissar. I've come here to sort out certain unacceptable partisan attitudes that have taken root in this building." "Ah, very good," said Grekov. "But who's going to sort out the Germans?" "Don't you worry about that. We'll find someone. And I haven't come here, as I heard someone suggest, for a bowl of soup. I'm here to give you a taste of Bolshevism." "Oh, good," said Grekov. "Let's have a taste of it." Half joking, but also half serious, Krimov continued, "And if necessary, Comrade Grekov, we'll eat you too." He now felt calm and sure of himself. Any doubts he had felt about the correct course of action had passed. Grekov had to be relieved of his command. It was clear that he was an alien and hostile element. None of the heroism displayed in this building could alter that. Krimov knew he had to deal with him. When it was dark, Krimov went up to him again. "Grekov, I want to talk seriously. What do you want?" "Freedom. That's what I'm fighting for." "We all want freedom." "Tell us another. You just want to sort out the Germans." "That's enough, Comrade Grekov," barked Krimov. "You'd do better to explain why you allow your soldiers to give expression to such naive and erroneous political judgments. With your authority you could put a stop to that as quickly as any commissar. But I get the impression your men say their bit and then look at you for approval. Take the man who asked about kolkhozes. What made you support him? Let me be quite frank. If you're willing, we can sort this out together. But if you're not willing, it could end badly for you." "Why make such a fuss about the kolkhozes? It's true, people don't like them. You know that as well as I do." "So you think you can change the course of history, do you? And you think you can put everything back just as it was before?" "What do you mean, everything?" "Just that, everything. The general coercion." Grekov spoke very slowly, almost reluctantly, and with heavy irony. He suddenly sat up straight and said, Enough of all this, Comrade Commissar. I was only teasing you. I'm as loyal a Soviet system citizen as you are. I resent your mistrust. All right, Grekov, but let's talk seriously then. We must stamp out the evil anti-Soviet spirit that's taken hold here. You gave birth to it, you must help me destroy it. You'll still get your chance for glory. I feel like going to bed. You need some rest too. Wait till you see what things are like in the morning. Fine. We'll continue tomorrow. I'm in no hurry. I'm not going anywhere. We'll find some way of coming to an agreement, said Grekov with a laugh. No, thought Krimov. This is no time for homeopathy. I must work with a surgeon's knife. You need more than words to straighten out a political cripple. There's something good in your eyes, said Grekov unexpectedly. But you've suffered a lot. Krimov raised his hands in surprise, but didn't reply. Taking this as a sign of agreement, Grekov went on. I've suffered too, but that's nothing. Just something personal. Not something for your report. That night, while he was asleep, Krimov was hit in the head by a stray bullet. The bullet tore the skin and grazed his skull. The wound wasn't dangerous, but he felt very dizzy, was unable to stand upright. He kept wanting to be sick. At Grekov's orders, a stretcher was improvised, and Krimov was carried out of the building just before dawn. His head was throbbing and spinning, and there was a constant hammering at his temples. Grekov went with him as far as the mouth of the underground passage. You've had bad luck, Comrade Commissar. A sudden thought flashed through Krimov's head. Maybe it was Grekov who had shot him. Towards evening his headache got worse, and he began to vomit. He was kept at the divisional first aid post for 2 days, and then taken to the left bank and transferred to the army hospital. Commissar Pivovarov made his way into the narrow bunkers that made up the first aid post. The wounded were lying side by side on the floor. Krimov wasn't there. He'd been taken the previous night to the left bank. Strange he should have got wounded so quickly, thought Pivovarov. He must be unlucky. Or perhaps very lucky indeed. Pivovarov had also come to the first aid post to see if it was worth transferring Beryozkin there. On his return to regimental HQ after nearly being killed on the way by a splinter from a German mortar bomb, he told Glushkov, Beryozkin's orderly, that the conditions in the first aid post were appalling. Everywhere you looked, there were heaps of blood-stained gauze, bandages and cotton wool. It was frightening. Yes, Comrade Commissar, said Glushkov. He's certainly better off in his own bunker. No question, said Pivovarov. And they don't even discriminate between a regimental commander and an ordinary soldier. They're all lying on the floor together. Glushkov, whose rank only entitled him to a place on the floor, said sympathetically, Oh, no, that's no good at all. Has he said anything? No, said Glushkov. He hasn't even looked at the letter from his wife. It's just lying there beside him. He won't even look at a letter from his wife, said Pivovarov. He really must be in a bad way. He picked up the letter, weighed it in his hand, held it in front of Beryozkin's face, and said sternly, Ivan Leontievich, this is a letter from your spouse. He paused for a moment, then said in a very different tone, Vanya, look, it's from your wife. Don't you understand? Hey, Vanya! Beryozkin didn't understand. His face was flushed, and his staring eyes were bright and empty. All day long the war knocked obstinately at the door of the bunker. Almost all the telephones had gone dead during the night. Beryozkin's, however, was still working, and people were constantly ringing him. Divisional HQ, Army HQ, his battalion commanders, Podchufarov and Dyrkin, and his neighbour, the commander of one of Gurov's regiments. People were constantly coming and going. The door squeaked. The tarpaulin, hung over the entrance by Glushkov, flapped in the wind. There had been a general sense of anxiety and anticipation since early that morning, In spite of, or perhaps because of, the intermittent artillery fire, the infrequent and carelessly inaccurate air raids, everyone felt certain that the German offensive was about to be unleashed. This certainty was equally tormenting to Chuikov, to Pivovarov, to the men in House 6-1, and to the commander of the infantry platoon who, to celebrate his birthday, had been drinking vodka all day beside the chimney of the Stalingrad tractor factory. Whenever anyone in the bunker said anything interesting or amusing, everyone immediately glanced at Byorozkin. Could he really not hear them? Company Commander Krenov, in a voice hoarse from the cold, was telling Pivovarov about an incident just before dawn. He had climbed up from the cellar, where his command post was situated, sat down on a stone, and listened to see if the Germans were up to any tricks yet. Suddenly he had heard a harsh, angry voice in the sky. "You sod! Why didn't you give us any lights?" Krenov had felt first amazed, then terrified. How could someone up in the sky know his name? Then he looked up and seen a Kukurutsinik gliding by with the engine switched off. The pilot was dropping provisions to House 6-1 and was annoyed there hadn't been any markers. Everyone looked round to see if Byorozkin had smiled. Only Grushkov imagined he could see a flicker of life in his glassy eyes. At lunchtime, the bunker emptied. Byorozkin still lay there, his long-awaited letter beside him. Grushkov sighed. Pivovarov and the new chief of staff had gone out for lunch. They were tucking into some first-class borscht and drinking their 100 grams of vodka. Grushkov himself had already been offered some of the borscht, but as the boss, the commander of the regiment, wasn't eating, all he had was a few drops of water. Grushkov tore open the envelope, went up to Byorozkin's bunk, and very slowly, in a quiet, clear voice, began reading. "Hello, my Vanya. Hello, my dearest. Hello, my beloved." Grushkov frowned, but he didn't stop reading. This tender, sad, kind letter from Byorozkin's wife had already been read by the censors. Now it was being read out loud to the unconscious Byorozkin, the only man in the world truly able to read it. Grushkov wasn't so very surprised when Byorozkin turned his head and stretched out his hand and said, "Give it to me." The lines of handwriting trembled between his large fingers. "Vanya, it's very beautiful here. Vanya, I miss you very much. Lyuba keeps asking where Papa's gone. We're living on the shore of a lake. The house is very warm. The landlady's got a cow, there's lots of milk. And then there's the money you sent us. When I go out in the morning, there are yellow and red maple leaves all over the cold water. There's already snow on the ground, and that makes the water even bluer. And the sky is pure blue, and the yellow and red of the leaves are incredibly bright. And Lyuba keeps asking me, 'Why are you crying?' Vanya, Vanya, my darling, thank you for everything, for everything. Thank you for all your kindness. How can I explain why I'm crying? I'm crying because I'm alive. Crying from grief that Slava's dead and I'm still alive. Crying from happiness that you're alive. I cry when I think of my mother and sister. I cry because of the morning light. I cry because everything round about is so beautiful, and because there's so much sadness everywhere, in everyone's life, and in my own. Vanya, Vanya, my dearest, my beloved." And his head began to spin. Everything became blurred. His fingers trembled. The letter itself trembled. Even the white, hot air was trembling. "Glushkov," said Byorozkin, "you must get me back in shape today." That was a phrase Tamara didn't like. "Tell me, is the boiler still working?" "The boiler's fine, but how do you think you're going to get better in one day? You've got a fever, 40 degrees, just like vodka. You can't expect that to vanish in a moment." An empty petrol drum was rolled into the bunker with a loud rumble. It was then half filled, by means of a teapot and a canvas bucket, with steaming hot river water. Grushkov helped Byorozkin undress, and walked him up to the drum. "The water's very hot, comrade Lieutenant Colonel," he said, touching the side of the drum very gingerly with his hand. "You'll be stewed alive. I called the Comrade Commissar, but he's at a meeting with the divisional commander. We should wait for him to come back." "What for?" "If anything happens to you, I'll shoot myself, and if I don't have the guts, Comrade Pivovarov will do it for me." "Give me a hand." Please, let me at least call the Chief of Staff." "Come on now." Byorozkin's voice was hoarse. He was naked, and he could barely stand upright. Nevertheless, Glushkov immediately stopped arguing. As he got into the water, Byorozkin winced and let out a groan. Glushkov paced round the drum, groaning in sympathetic anxiety. Just like a maternity home, he thought suddenly. Byorozkin lost consciousness for a while. His fever and the general anxiety of war blurred together into a mist. His heart seemed to stop, and he could no longer even feel the scalding hot water. Then he came to and said to Glushkov, "You must mop the floor." Glushkov took no notice of the water spilling over the edge. Byorozkin's crimson face had gone suddenly white. His mouth had fallen open, and huge drops of sweat, to Glushkov they looked almost blue, had appeared on his close-shaven head. He began to lose consciousness again, but when Glushkov tried to drag him out of the water, he said very clearly, "No, I'm not ready yet." He was racked by a fit of coughing. As soon as it was over, without even waiting to get his breath back, he said, "Pour in some more water." At last he got out. Looking at him, Glushkov felt even more despondent. He rubbed Byorozkin dry, helped him back into bed, and covered him over with a blanket and some greatcoats. He then began piling on everything he could find, jackets, trousers, tarpaulins. By the time Pivovarov returned, everything had been tidied up, though the bunker still felt hot and damp like a bathhouse. Byorozkin was sleeping peacefully. Pivovarov stood over his bed for a moment and looked at him. "He's got a splendid face," he thought. "I'm sure he never wrote denunciations." For some reason, he had been troubled all day long by the memory of how, 5 years before, he had helped unmask Shmelyev, a friend and fellow student of his, as an enemy of the people. All kinds of rubbish came into one's head during this sinister lull in the fighting. He could see Shmelyev's sad, pitiful look as his friend's denunciation was read out at the meeting. About 12 o'clock, Chuikov himself telephoned, passing over the head of the divisional commander. He was very worried about Byorozkin's regiment. According to the latest intelligence reports, the Germans had amassed a particularly heavy concentration of tanks and infantry opposite the tractor factory. "Well, how are things?" he asked impatiently. "And who's in command? Batyuk said the commanding officer had pneumonia or something. He wanted to have him taken across to the left bank." "I'm in command," answered a hoarse voice. "Lieutenant Colonel Byorozkin. I did have something of a cold, but I'm all right now." "Yes, you do sound a bit hoarse," said Chukov, almost gloatingly. "Well, the Germans will give you some hot milk. They've got it all ready. They won't be long." "Yes, comrade," said Byorozkin. "I understand you." "Very good," said Chukov. "But if you ever think of retreating, remember, I can make you an egg flip at least as good as the Germans' hot milk."